Now, the United States has hailed progress made during Ukraine peace talks in Geneva.
This is a joint statement which was released by the United States and Ukraine, and that unveiled an updated peace framework that upholds Ukraine's sovereignty. Now, the United States Secretary of State Marco Rubio led the American delegation in Geneva on Sunday, meeting with Ukrainian and European officials to discuss a cessation of hostilities that began with Russia's invasion in February 2022.
The framework revised a previous 28-point plan that had required Ukraine to cede territory, reduce its armed forces, and renounce NATO ambition. These were terms that Kyiv had rejected and sought changes to.
Striking an optimistic chord, Rubio said that U.S. was making changes to the peace plan based on Ukraine's suggestions so as to come to an agreement.
We arrived here today with one goal, and the goal was to take is 28 points or 26 points, depending on which version as it continued to evolve, and try to narrow the ones that were open items. And we have achieved that today in a very substantial way. So I feel very optimistic that we're going to get there in a very reasonable period of time very soon. Our goal is to end this war as soon as possible, but we need a little more time.
Now, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky said the talks with U.S. in Switzerland to achieve peace in Ukraine were substantive and that U.S. President Donald Trump's team is hearing Ukraine's concerns.
The delegation has just reported on the results of their discussions, and these were substantive conversations. A lot is changing. We are working very carefully on the steps needed to end the war. It is important that there is dialogue with the American representatives, and there are signals President Trump's team is hearing us.
According to reports, U.S. and Ukrainian officials also discussed a potential visit by Ukrainian President Zelensky to Washington to meet Trump as early as this week following the Geneva talks. Sources say the trip, which is yet to be confirmed, would focus on the most sensitive parts of the plan, especially territorial issues.
Meanwhile, on the war front, Russian forces staged a massive drone attack on Sunday on Kharkiv, Ukraine's second largest city. A video release showed emergency services working to extinguish flames and recover bodies in the aftermath of the attack. And according to the mayor, at least 4 people were killed in the strikes, while 17 were injured. 15 strikes were reported in 6 areas of the city in northeastern Ukraine. The governor of Dnipropetrovsk region, farther south, said 2 people were killed in a Russian strike on the town of Marhanov. And well, to discuss more on this, we're now being joined by Professor James A. Russell from Ontario, California. He is an associate professor of national security affairs at the Naval Postgraduate School. Thank you so much, Professor, for joining us. Always a pleasure talking to you. Now, do you foresee a peace plan, which can get Russia back from its core demands? Since we know that Ukraine, that begins with, Ukraine to see territory cuts to the Ukrainian army and dropping NATO ambitions.
Well, before answering that, I think the first thing to note was that in your excellent run-up report was the comment by the Ukrainian president, which spoke to the seriousness with which the Ukrainians are addressing this circumstance, which is the most important thing, I think, because it's the Ukrainians, of course, who have been struggling on the battlefield for the last 6 months. They have been steadily losing ground, and their incentives to try to reach agreement, I would say, have changed substantially over the last 6 months or so. But moving from that, the question of can these what were regarded previously as red lines out of Kiev, which was the idea, again, of the presence of Western forces in Ukraine, U.S. security guarantees, all these kinds of issues are TBD. They're yet to be worked out. And these are I would have said, the fundamental issues. The size of the Ukrainian army. There's a whole host of issues in this proposed agreement, which is said to have, at least according to press reports, is said to have originated in Moscow. So But stepping back from all this, I think I would say that, we should all hope that the war can be brought to a speedy conclusion as quickly as possible. Hundreds of thousands of people have been killed or wounded in this awful conflict, and the world would be a better place if the war stopped.
I hear your point. Professor, let me just come to the comment that was made by Marco Rubio. He said tremendous progress has been made. This is after the talks in Geneva. Now, Russia was not on that table. So when he says progress, for US getting that deal made is progress. For Ukraine ensuring its sovereignty is progress. But when Marco Rubio says progress was made, does that mean they were able to get Ukraine to agree to most of those terms which came from Russia? How do you see it?
It's of course the most important question. And I regret to have to sort of say that America's previous forays into these kinds of circumstances, and I'm thinking here of the Gaza agreement, in which the I's are not dotted, the T's are not crossed, it's not really a peace plan, it was done on the fly, the Palestinians were not included. There are certain parallels here with the circumstances between, again, key stakeholders in this, which are the Europeans, it's the Ukrainians, it's the Russians, it's the United States. The fact of the matter is that everybody needs to be around the conference table together, engaged in multilateral diplomacy. And a very regrettable feature of American foreign policy stretching back more than a decade is that we don't really seem able to do actual real multilateral diplomacy anymore, which is difficult, right? It requires seasoned and trained diplomats. This is all being done, on the fly, as I said, as a document that shows up with a presidential envoy, several days ago, at least according to press reports. And the I's have to be dotted, the T's have to be crossed. If they're going to be, just as an example, if they're going to be security guarantees, what are those security guarantees exactly? Can the Ukrainians trust any of the security guarantees that are going to come out of an American administration, which has moved all over the map in the last 16 months, 12 months or so are they taking Moscow's point of view? Are they supporting Kyiv?
Exactly. And from that, I come to the role of the European allies, because in the end, when it comes to these talks, I'm sure there is some kind of role that Europeans are going to take. But when we look at how vulnerable do you think Ukraine is at this point? Because on the battlefield, it's Russia who is overtaking all these areas, and then maybe not now. I mean, if this was earlier, then maybe some two regions must have been taken. Now, if we go even further delay, maybe he would take over other regions as well, and then be like, okay, now we're going to take these territories, and this is going to be the point of contention we start. How vulnerable do you think Ukraine is at this point, and what does it mean for European allies too?
Well, the European allies, it strikes me, have taken the extremely unrealistic position that the reverses on the battlefield can somehow be changed with additional defense equipment, new kinds of defense equipment, when the reality is that Ukraine's out of men. And they're fighting a country with 300 million people, and it's not that there's an inexhaustible supply of Russian soldiers, but Russia is just grinding them down. And there's no way for the Europeans, I don't care what kind of equipment is being delivered. The Ukrainians are said to have recently concluded an agreement for advanced fighter aircraft, for example, from the French. Well, advanced fighter aircraft aren't going to change the circumstances on the battlefield. So the Europeans come to this whole endeavor, largely having been excluded, of course, by the United States, in a position of decreased leverage. The United States, the Trump administration, essentially dumped this problem into their laps several months ago. And the Europeans, of course, see the advances by Moscow is extremely alarming for European security. So they have their own interests in this circumstance, to include the ability of the to continue having some kind of military and security relationship with the Europeans, which of course is directly opposed to Moscow's interests, right? So how does this get resolved? These again speak to the subtleties of the agreement and the need for deft and experienced diplomats to really be working these over.
Understood.
And I sincerely hope that Marco Rubio and the team at the State Department is engaged in that right now.
Yeah, and Professor Russell, even if you go back to the Alaska summit, Putin had said that our core issues need to be resolved. And even now, this peace plan, the first draft of it, those core issues still remain. So nothing seems to have changed from the Russian perspective. The compromise only seems to be coming from one side. That's where things stand as of now. We'll wait and watch how this one pans out. That was Professor Russell joining us from California. Thank you so much, sir.
Thank you.